that flow state that you enter when you're climbing, like that it's like this rare, like amazing euphoric feeling when you're climbing. Like it's rare to have that in bouldering as much as you can really tap into that in like sport climbing or like these longer forms. That's one thing for me, that sport climbing has just always been so attractive to me, and like such a joyful thing is just like when you get in that flow and you just like clear everything that's going on around you and you're just climbing, and it's, to me, there's nothing really like that feeling.
All right, Matty, that's the cold open. We're starting. Matty Hong, welcome to the Testpiece podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, we just had to click record because there's just too much fun climbing stuff to talk about. Yeah, great to get you to sit down. We were trying to do it before, but then, Matt, you had to go and just live the frigging dream by going and being in Europe and sport climbing and deep water soloing and just having a blast for the last couple of months. So glad to sit you down, man. Glad to talk about climbing.
Yeah, sorry I dipped out on you before, but now I think we got some fun things to talk about, so.
I would dip out on this podcast with you if I was going to Europe. so so Matt, you were out there, and for everyone that recognizes you and your name, you've sent multiple 515, some of the hardest routes in the world, and you're also behind the camera capturing some of those too. So yeah, just psyched to, well, actually psyched to just start off with that trip that you went on. What were you doing in Europe? Where did you go? Just take us on a little trip around the world with you.
Yeah, sure. So I guess right before we talked, I was about to head off to Europe, and my first destination was going to be Mallorca, which is a place that I've always been fond of as a climber, and it's kind of like the mecca for deep water soloing in the world. It's probably the most famous area, and I went there for about 4.5 weeks. I was there. The first 2 weeks were for a shoot for Real Rock, which is going to be a film in this year's tour. And then I actually did have plans to go to Norway, to go to Flatanger, where I had never been before, but my partner kind of fell through, and I decided to just kind of stay in Majorca because, I mean, really, like, being there for 2 weeks filming every day is somewhat torturous because you're just hanging over the water, you're watching these other people climb, and you're just waiting to like get on the wall yourself. It's definitely like an ideal place to also be a photographer, though. Like the imagery you can capture in Majorca is pretty unique, and just super fun to shoot. But I was itching to climb, and then once that shoot ended, the opportunity arose to stay, and I met up with a few climbers there, and yeah, I just decided to kind of put my head down and start projecting some stuff there, and ended up staying for about 3 weeks working on Big Fish, which was put up by Chris in 2017 or 18, I think.
Long time ago, dude. Always
Yeah.
on the forefront, Chris Sharma, the Mallorca man himself. So you like Mallorca, really? You like the the cheap wine, the beautiful ocean, the pretty people, the
Yeah,
climbing.
it's crazy, huh?
You like that too, huh? Yeah, longtime listeners will know that. Kind of my favorite. So you've been there before, though. When? How many times have you been? Like, what pulled you there in the first place?
Sure, yeah. So after high school, I actually took a trip with some friends there, but it was in the spring, and it was just the wrong season to be there completely. We ended up sport climbing. Most of the deep water sailing at the time was wet. I also wasn't quite the climber that I am today, so I think I looked at things a bit differently. But it wasn't until 2 years ago, I think, that I actually made a return trip, but that again was for a photography or a filming job. So I was there only for about a week, shooting every day. I think I got 2 climbing days in on that trip, but nothing that allowed me to actually like project anything. It was just to have that experience climbing over the water. But um, I loved it instantly, and like the second I just like started climbing without a rope, listening to the ocean crashing onto you, like it's unlike anything else in our sport, that feeling, and just like how exposed it feels and how like alone you feel on the wall and how freeing and just like so many different kind of sensations that you don't really feel in other uh, types of climbing really just kind of like stand out immediately. And I quickly fell in love with deep water soloing. And I've done that Seco block competition multiple years and always enjoyed that. Always enjoyed just like jumping and falling into the water, and just like for me it's been like something I've always wanted to do, was to go and have a proper climbing trip in Mallorca. So after that shoot a few years ago, this one popped up, and I've just been really itching to get back and really like put my head down on a proper climbing trip there. So this was really fun for me, and definitely like the start, I think, of probably a reoccurring trip.
Nice. Yeah, I've been 3 times. I feel like it's never enough. It just makes me want to go back every year. I'm curious. Actually, first I want to say it's hilarious that people probably don't know that Mallorca is a really good sport climbing destination. That was actually a long time ago was kind of well known, and a place to go. And I'm curious though, when you first started doing deep water soloing, like what did you start on, and were you terrified? Like what was your how'd you dip your toes in the water, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I kind of had a nice slow intro, just like the way that I just said to you, like these short little trips where I got to dabble with it a bit, and then like on this most recent trip while I was shooting, at the end of the day, I would run up a pitch on the Diablo wall or Calavarcas or these other pretty popular crags where there's a lot of established routes already. So I think I just started playing around, and I think I didn't really like jump into a hard project right away, which is probably a wise decision for anyone choosing to get into deep water soloing or try it out, is to take it step by step, maybe drop the grade a significant amount of levels to make sure you're comfortable falling and you're okay swimming in the water, and all these different variables that come into play. But I think I did quickly kind of adapt to the style of climbing. I think I was able to kind of like use a lot of skills that I'd gained in other disciplines, and apply those to deep water soloing. And I mean, one thing that I feel like I have a fairly like positive thing in my climbing is I do have a pretty good head for climbing, and I feel very controlled and calm most of the time while I'm climbing, and I think that that's a very important thing for deep water soloing. It's being very confident and being very at ease with what you're doing and trying not to panic in these moments. But
Easier
but
said than
yeah,
done.
yeah, it is, it definitely is. And I can't say I wasn't scared at all, because there were many times where you're up there thinking about the fall rather than the next move. But it's a process that you start to learn like you do other disciplines. You learn how to approach a boulder prom, you learn how to work a sport climb, and you kind of learn how to approach a deep water solo in the same way. It just takes a bit of practice and a bit of failure also. But yeah, it quickly became something that I was really really fond of, and I think I really liked trying hard. I think as soon as I got on something that was a bit more challenging, I really liked the aspect of pushing myself, of like that try hard moment over the water. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to keep kind of pushing myself on routes there, and there's a lot of hard stuff to try. So
Thank you, Chris Sharma.
yeah.
It's funny that you talked about adapting to that style and having a good head and staying calm. Something I often see in boulders that go sport climbing, actually even sport climbers, is that they think they don't have endurance, but what they're really doing is they're over gripping because they're scared, and maybe they don't even know that they're scared, but they're over gripping. And I was in Mallorca with some 514 climbers, and I watched them not do mid 512. They were just locking off every move, just scared. And that ability to be calm, there's something really special about that feeling in general, probably in life, but we'll just say in climbing, about being calm when everything else is screaming at you to not be calm because there's literally 50 feet of air underneath you, crashing waves. And yeah, you said you have a good head in climbing. Did you do anything to develop that, or is that just you being a lifelong climber?
Um, I think that's mostly just has to do with experience for the most part. I think like my upbringing in climbing and my entire life as a climber has brought me to the point of where I have gained the ability to relax in stressful situations. Like, I don't think that's something I was born with. I think it's something that I definitely learned through this sport. And I think also the variety of styles that I've tried in climbing. I've done, multi pitch, I've done trad, I've done, these expeditions where they're kind of like a lot of no fall situations. And, I've done highball bouldering and sport climb. Like, I really feel like I grabbed little bits from all these different disciplines and have applied that now to deep water soloing. But it's really something that I've gained over time and just through the process of trying so many different types of climbs.
Yeah, you mentioned to me earlier that you felt like deep water soloing kind of is a blending or a culmination. I don't know the word I'm looking for there, but that it requires a lot of different skills in climbing that maybe you get from doing a bunch of disciplines. How does that come to play for you?
Yeah, sure. I think I was referring like bouldering, for instance, in relation to deep water sailing. You really need to like understand how to fall properly. You need to know how to move your body in the air and like be safe, because bouldering, you're hitting the ground every time, and falling safely is crucial in that aspect. And I also think like just that try hard mentality of bouldering is pretty much applied across the board in climbing. But that's something that in deep water soloing, sometimes you really just got to flip the switch and you just got to give everything for one move. And that mindset I found to be pretty beneficial in some of the deep water solos I was trying. And then with the other disciplines, sport climbing, you need that calmness, you need the endurance, you need like the calculatedness of sport climbing, because you're climbing these long routes over the ocean. And I think like the mindset of a sport climber is really appropriate for that. And then like the scary stuff in multi-pitch and trad and like these more uh like adventurous types of climbing, that's really where like the fear aspect comes into play. And like I would consider myself a fairly beginner trad climber overall. Like and I like in terms of my mindset with trad climbing. um and I think just like calculating risk and knowing, when to push it and also when to back off of something is something that's quite appropriate for trad climbing and deep water soloing. So, a lot of times trying big fish, for example, you get to a high point for the first time, and you're now higher up above the water than you've ever been, and usually and more often than not, like the smarter option is probably just to jump off at that point and test the fall, make sure you're comfortable, and then your next attempt when you get to that point, maybe throw for the move, don't stick the hold, you're taking another fall a little more out of control, and then finally you're sticking the move and you're going through the next. But it's definitely like a lot of calculated risk and just kind of knowing when to push it and also when to step down.
Man, you're just making my hands sweat. I just love it. I love how you described all those different factors that go into what what successful deep water soloing takes. And it's interesting you talking about that, reaching those new points and then kind of deciding what to do. I think that's something that was really memorable for me when I started doing it. Was I think I would have a route and I'd do one more move and I kind of jump. You kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
can, and I think that something that made that experience really special is that there wasn't a lot of video. Like I didn't really know what I was doing. We'd be on these routes that like there's no video, there's no tick marks. You're kind of just feeling it through. And so I love that. You keep mentioning Big Fish, and Big Fish is you got the second ascent of this gorgeous climb that Chris Sharma had done back in 2017 or 18. You said, and can you just describe Big Fish and then also kind of compare it to some of those other more classics like on Diablo Wall, where I just think it's some people may think that deep water soloing is just deep water soloing, but let's just say Calabarca's very pleasant and mellow. And I think I've done a backflip off of the top of the wall there. Diablo Wall, well, I mean, Devil's Wall, is a little more intimidating, but there's this continual next levels of the sport. And so just put in context what Big Fish was like.
Yeah, sure. Well, my first like experience with big fish happened while we were filming still for the Real Rock, and I was not necessarily supposed to be climbing or anything, but we ended up being on a boat that day, kind of exploring the north side of the island where you need more of like a boat helps with some of the access to those cliffs. But we were cruising around. Chris, wanted to show us this cave where Big Fish was. He also had a project at the time, which is now the Black Pearl. And there's a few other established lines there, but we pull around the corner. It's right near Alasha. So these are all near Sawyer at the top of the island. You basically drive right past Alasha. You see it. And Alasha is like this really clean face, gently overhanging, very different than what Big Fish is. So you see that, and it looks like a hard sport climb when you see it. It looks like a hard boulder or something like that, pretty blank. And then you go around the corner, and then you see this massive cave, and this is where Big Fish is. And the cave itself is probably close to maybe 55 or 60 meters tall. I
Whoa.
want to say like it's quite massive. But the hard climbing ends maybe 20 meters up the wall or something like that. But we ended up going, and Chris told me to hop on it. Of course, he wanted to see some action on his route that hasn't seen any. And I really was just like questing up this thing, and it starts on the far right side of the cave, and you do this long traverse, and it's not too difficult, maybe 12 plus 13 minus, but it takes probably 15 minutes to do this traverse, or 10 minutes once you have it more dialed in. But it's really like a unique, just fun. You're cruising along the side of this cave. You're getting higher and higher as you go. You reach a big crack system. You're cutting your feet. You're traversing. It's not hard climbing, but it's quite tiring. And then you crawl into kind of like a hole in the middle of the cave. And here you can pin your back and your feet against the sides, and you can get a complete no hands rest. And from this point on is really when Big Fish starts. It's when the business of the climb starts. And so my first time up it, I actually got to the hole, and Chris was yelling bait up at me. I ended up getting my hands mixed up, and I fell at the start of the crux of Big Fish. And then we ended up leaving right after that. And it wasn't until the shoot ended, and I realized that I was going to stay, where I was just like, now I would love to go back to Big Fish, and I would love to like actually try that upper boulder prom, see what it's all about, and put a few days of effort into this thing. So that ended up being really the objective for me for the rest of my time there. I spent about 2 weeks trying it, and then a week staying afterwards, trying some other stuff and supporting some friends. But yeah, that Big Fish was turned out to be the main objective for me.
I think that something that makes deep water soloing special is that adventure aspect of the traversing you're talking about, where there's a lot of climbs where it's not hard, but it's tiring. And I don't know, my head gets a little weird as I'm kind of like doing the intro stuff, and then you're in this rest and you're so by yourself, right? And like you're kind of just looking out over the ocean, and you're like, am I really doing this? Like, that's really tall. I just love that feeling. I'm I'm curious about that first initial feeling when you saw that cave, because I know that there's certain climbs that can just be intimidating, and that can make them special too. When you
Yeah.
said 50, or would you say like 50 meters or 60 meters? I
To the
mean,
top of the cave, but probably the last 10 meters is, you're not falling. It's easy scrambling or so, but
I
yeah.
understand that, but that does not change what it looks like when you go around. You go like,
Totally.
oh shit, because I
Yeah.
I just I mean, I'm thinking about some of the other classics that you must have ticked along the way, and you know, just that feeling of, you know, that's another level, and that's one of the reasons it really stood out to me is it's very different to tackle a cave like that. So, is that what drew you to it in the first place too?
Yeah, I think I was definitely intimidated when I saw the cave. Like I remember seeing there's so the sequence of Big Fish, the last hard move ends with basically a big lunge to kind of like a flat jug. It's pretty
Any idea what
good, but
height
it's not
that's
like
at?
massive. I would say that's probably around like 60 to 60 feet maybe. Like I would say it's like the top of, if you've been to Majorca, like the top of Diablo Wall is about where like that dyno sits. Maybe yeah, probably right around there.
And so
um
I got interrupted just because where people might be familiar with Mallorca is that dosage, or I guess videos of uh,
yeah,
Clem
like the
doing
dyno, the
Lost
lux.
Gotten to.
Yeah,
So I've done that climb, and that dyno,
nice.
when you see it, like people think it's wild and crazy. When you first get up there, it's exciting. Don't get me wrong, but after you do it a bunch, it's not that big a deal. Like it looks cool, everyone loves it, but that's probably at, I don't know, that's probably at like 35 feet, maybe
Yeah,
something like that,
yeah,
and that's spicy. But if you don't want belly flop there, but really that's very different from them stacking another 20 feet onto it. And this is where it really blows me away what you're doing. So I sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to put in
mhm.
context for how people might understand how serious it is climbing at the top of Diablo Wall and doing the hard
Sure.
moves up there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely had like my introductions on Diablo Wall. I did like some of the harder lines on that wall, and had the feeling of trying hard at the top, and I definitely feel like I had the proper stepping stones to get there. Maybe not, maybe I missed a few, but I think like when you go to that side of the island and you see like the potential for new lines over there, like everything is bigger, everything is kind of more extreme, the water seems more ominous, and just like the whole environment kind of changes, it seems. And I think Big Fish especially just feels a bit kind of, it has this remote feeling because it's in this cave, and you really just feel kind of secluded, and there's really no one else around. So when I started trying that, I was with Yerne Kruder, who's frequented Majorca. He's done some of the harder lines there. He's kind of like the other big guy in deep water soloing. He's done a lot of cool stuff, and we both decided to try Big Fish together. But it was something that we kind of like, we had a flotation device at the bottom in case someone fell and like needed to be like, maybe they got like shook up or slightly like knocked out a little bit and like needed something. So we always had like certain safety precautions set up. We had, someone always had to be down, ready to jump in the water. You would never try this line alone. You would never try it with people on the top of the cliff watching you. There's just a lot of different things that could go wrong. It's unlikely, but while you're in Majorca, you do hear these stories of collapsed lungs, dislocated shoulders. Someone fell off as Pontas, and the water, the the air in their lungs when they fell came up through their throat so fast that it actually exploded their esophagus.
Oh my
So
God.
like, there's a lot of like things that you wouldn't necessarily think of happening that could go wrong. So you do have to be really aware of this stuff. And I think with Big Fish, I definitely took my first few attempts pretty seriously as safety precautions. But you're aware of these stories. I was filming with Josh Lowell, and he told me like the first time he was telling me a story, the first time he ever went to Majorca, Chris like was like, they got in late. Chris was like, "Let's go to the Diablo Wall." They ran out to the Diablo Wall. They all decided to jump off, and Josh jumps and immediately dislocates his shoulder, and it's just like, then you're like swimming in the ocean with a dislocated shoulder. You got to climb out with a dislocated shoulder, and there's risk for sure. But I
Ooh.
think that risk does exist in the other disciplines of climbing. It's just you gotta be aware of it for sure. And And sorry to like this is a bit off topic, but I forgot to mention like my first experiences deep water soloing were like on a boat in these kind of like random locations for a video shoot that we were doing. And I think what really kind of drew me into the sport, or to that aspect of our sport, is like we were like going by these cliffs, and we had this opportunity to just be like, hey, I want to try this line. And we would just like pull over on the boat, we jump off, grab on the rock, and you just end up questing up, and you have no idea where you're going. There's no chalk or anything, but like that feeling of just like on sighting over the ocean on like virgin rock is incredible, honestly. And yeah, that for me was like the initial like, this is amazing, there's nothing else like this. And then um yeah, in relation to big fish, like that was just like taking it to the next level. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm wandering a bit, but
No, no,
yeah.
dude. I gotta highlight what you said, where it's this ability to just kind of climb on virgin rock on sighting. And I did not have that same first experience, but I did have this kind of overwhelming feeling of there's much less rules than I feel like is in the climbing I'm used to, where, in sport climbing, I mean, you definitely you have to clip those bolts. You're like, where's the next bolt? I'm heading there. Maybe you have some wiggle room how you get there. Bouldering, I mean, in some ways, bouldering is very aggressively rule based. I mean, not always. The best lines don't have that, but you go into this survival mode in deep water soloing too, where you just don't feel like there's anything you can do wrong other than try not to die. And it's I love that freedom. And you mentioned earlier, well, a few times, like that alone feeling, like you get that so quickly in deep water soloing, because the ocean is loud, and you can't, even if you can hear your buddies, there's no way, you don't get to say take. There's no way out. No one can help you. And when you talk about that, I think you said secluded, these caves, when you sit in these rests, sometimes you just look out and there's just nothing out there. It's just ocean, and it just makes you feel like, yeah, like you're on a wild adventure. And yeah, damn,
Yeah,
I
it's
love it, man.
intimidating. I mean, for me also, like one aspect that is a bit was one of my fears, definitely, of deep water sailing was like the ocean itself. And I come from Colorado. I'm not like grown up in the ocean. I'm not accustomed to the creatures in the ocean. So I'm the type of person that, like, if you can't see what's underneath you, you're assuming that it's a shark. Or you're assuming that it's something that's about to just fucking like grab your ankles and pull you under. So like there's moments where you fall and you're wading in like this dark blue sea, the waves are kind of crashing around you, it takes you a few minutes to swim to shore. And like for me, some of the most panic moments of my trip, I think, came from like these moments just like kind of sitting in the water. But that's I think an internal fear of mine. I think sharks are pretty scarce in that part of the world, but
Yeah, yeah, not a bunch of sharks out in Mallorca. There's some jellyfish, but I think what you're tapping into that's really true is again that adventure feeling. And Calabarca, like whoever's listening to this and goes to Mallorca for the first time, go
yeah,
Calabarcas.
definitely
You
go to
walk
Calabarcas.
you walk in, it's this beautiful beach. There's like food for sale. There's people
Crystal
cheering
blue
you on.
water.
Oh, and it's very protected, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's a very
I mean, you're
protected
climbing
bay.
and there's people swimming, there's people snorkeling, there's people on paddle boards. You feel very safe while
Yeah,
you're in
and
Calabarcas. And
and then you start going, and then it's something like, actually, Cova del Diablo has a bit of protection, but then like Calasa now is really feels very out in the open. And I have not climbed on the north side, but being really isolated, I just love that. This is something I think is special about Mallorca, is that feels like you can just keep leveling up. You can keep pushing your levels, and I guess that's one question I have for you is, as you go up these levels, at least for me, the first time I went to Diablo Wall, I was like, oh, okay, this is for real. This is dangerous. This is scary. And then, like I was talking about that Lost God Dino, I was like, oh, it's actually not. Like it takes a while to adjust, but as you keep pushing that, y- you know, big fish, yeah. Well, I mean, it gets to this height where, do you know if it's like, did you fall
Yeah,
off the
yeah.
crux? Do you have any close calls?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess like I'll start just by saying like Big Fish and a lot of the harder lines that get climbed in Majorca are practiced on a rope beforehand. The difficult sections for the most part are rehearsed. I know Chris has done this in the past with pretty much all of his hard deep water solo lines is you rig a line on a tree or you sling a rock up top and you wrap in and you kind of like work out the sequences because um there's I mean, there's so much to say about the process of deep water sailing, but like one thing is like it's slow, and it's a lot slower than working a sport climb. Um, like the fact that if you mess up a little piece of beta and you fall, you have wet shoes, you have wet hands. It takes you an hour to dry off to get ready to give another try, and sometimes by that point the rock might be wet or the day is over or whatever. Like you're really limited on the amount of times you can try something, and especially when things start to get hard, it can be really difficult to actually find the correct sequence or the correct beta. um, so, with Big Fish, my first couple tries were ground up. I was working on the lower half a little bit, trying to dial it in. I also didn't know if I was ready to commit to the whole thing yet. So I was just kind of climbing. But then eventually you end up throwing a line down it to chalk up the holds, to put tick marks, and do all this stuff. But it's also was really challenging about working Big Fish is there's no bolts, right? And it's a steep cave. So you wrap off the top, you have to build another anchor like right before the crux, and then when you're in the crux, it being so steep, you're hanging out from the wall quite a bit, so you can't even like really grab in wherever you want and pull in and start climbing. You gotta get a swing going, and then you gotta like lower yourself as you're swinging. And then I had two hooks on my harness, so I'm kicking off the wall, I'm hooking into a pocket, I'm chalking up my hands, getting ready to go. I grab onto the wall, I kick the hook out with my feet, and then I'm like on the wall, I do a move. And then maybe if I fall immediately, let's say I fall on the move right away, I start swinging again, I got to jug back up to my anchor, get the swing going, go back down, hook back in, and then try to get back on and figure out the sequence. So even on the rope with Big Fish, it was slow, and it was like there were certain moves where I was just like, I'm not really sure how that's going to feel not being on a rope. And certain aspects of the climb you do have to figure out ground up. I think that aspect was really challenging, but also, like I do find that like with deep water soloing, there should be certain ethics, or there should be certain like protocols about how you did do certain climbs,
No
because
bolts. No one
for
add any
instance,
bolts.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, you don't want to put bolts in over the ocean. Honestly, it's like it takes away from, as soon as you put one bolt in Big Fish, then all of a sudden, as Pontas has a bolt and Alasha has a bolt, and it really takes away from what Chris did, and also just the pureness of the type of climbing that you're doing. But I would say on that note, like if you are willing to try, and if you're up for the challenge, like always try to go ground up when you're deep water soloing, like unless you're really sure that this is something that's going to take you some time or take you some real work to figure out. Like it's such an amazing thing to try to do a root ground up. Like it's unique to deep water soloing, and I also just feel like that it's pretty rad to do something like that. And if someone were to do Espontas ground up or do a Lasha ground up or Big Fish, like that is a significant like that's a significant ascent. Like it's pretty rad. But
Yeah.
I was kind of following the protocols of all these other guys who have done the hard stuff, and working on a rope was crucial for us, especially with our time window and everything.
Yeah.
um
We did pretty much every, I think most people do things ground up
yeah,
because it's
that's the
just,
typical way.
well, I just also think, I don't know, it's, maybe if you're going to be there for 6 weeks and you have a project, I think in general, I mean, most people do boulders ground up even, or, well, maybe not ground up, but they don't wrap down stuff.
Right.
But, for us, sometimes when we put a rope down, I mean, it's like this in bouldering too. Even though you couldn't really try the moves, because I had that same experience where it's just you just kind of can't. You want to know, you want to kind of have an idea that once you get into what you consider no fall territory, that you have some idea about what's going on. Uh, and so it makes me wonder about this whole process. How does that affect grading? Okay, so actually, yeah. How hard is big fish? And then, like, you have so much experience in that grade range. How's that all work out for grading?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, honestly, and I think like uh, a lot of people struggle to put real grades on certain things because, like, for instance, if Big Fish was a bolted climb, I think it would be 14C. I think just being able to sit on a bolt, work out the bolted problem, it wouldn't be harder than 14C. I, in my mind, think it definitely adds to the grade when you have all these other variables to take into account. Like some people give an extra grade for a scary high ball, for instance. I'm not necessarily saying that you get an extra grade if the deep water solo is scary, but I think actually the process of climbing it is more challenging, and that's where maybe you get the extra grade. Um, and a lot of that, a lot of yeah, it's really quite hard to tell because it's broken down by a no hands rest also in the middle. It really revolves around one boulder prom, which I think sits at around V12 probably. It's like an 8 move V12 or something like that. And in my eyes, like it felt like if I were to compare it to all these other climbs that I've done, like I put about as much effort into like a 14D as I would have Big Fish. So that in my eyes, it kind of sits right around that grade, like 14 plus. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's honestly, it's an incredible route. Like if this thing was bolted and it was in like a crag that had access, it would be one of the best climbs like at the cliff. Like it's such a unique line and the rock is amazing. The moves are perfect. The boulder itself is like this blank section of rock with perfect slots and pockets and cracks, and like you're using really every like indentation on the rock to climb up the wall. And it's amazing. And to get back to your question that you asked 20 minutes ago about if I ever had any bad falls, I did like when I was working the route, and like when I did get really close to doing it, I fell on the dyno, and it ended up like fully knocking the wind out of me. I came up and I was just laying on my back for a while trying to catch my breath. It actually felt like someone kicked me in the nuts like as hard as they could at the same time. Like I felt like this, like, and it honestly killed my motivation a bit, because I felt like I fell at the last point where you can fall, and I felt like I did get kind of lucky with my fall. Like I pulled out of this, I was looking down trying to get my balance, and then I kind of like lifted my upper part of my body back to a pencil form at the end, but I didn't quite get there in time, so it hit me in the chest, and I think it shook me up, and I really didn't want to try again that day or anything, but that actually ended up being the day that I did it because a boat full of people that we knew pulled up and just like were screaming at us, and I was with Yerne. He gave it another try, and I don't know, just like the energy changed because one thing about that cave is it's very remote, like we were saying, like you feel very alone in there. And when you're climbing that high up and you have to push yourself, like honestly, like it makes a huge difference to have a few people screaming for you or cheering for you. There were times where we would be waiting in the no hands rest, and there's some paddle boarders that would go by, or like there's a boat of fishermen or scuba divers or whatever, and we would be like, come on, just stop and like cheer for us, please. We need like this extra motivation right now. And for me, like that's actually what really made a big difference, was having like a boat full of people come and scream at me. um,
God, how much? What does that say about Chris just out there for the past decade,
I mean,
pushing his
yeah, I mean,
limits?
I feel like I have something to say about that. Just like I was so I'm so impressed with what Chris has done in climbing, and also just like how far ahead it seems he's been for so many years. And the fact that he's put up these first ascents alone, to me, is like one of the most significant, maybe like under the radar, like key points of his ascents, is the fact that he's trying these things alone. Like he was trying, most of his biggest achievements in climbing, he's working alone. And especially when you're doing deep water solos, like it's intimidating to be up there and just kind of like having no one else to share that experience with, or no one else to talk about beta with. And I would say after climbing this, or even just after trying it and hearing when he had put it up, I was really impressed. Just the fact that I think there's something to say about like his mentality with climbing. I mean, he definitely like seeks out this first ascent. That's kind of who he is. It's like he loves climbing on new rock. He loves putting up his own stuff, and it's definitely like who he is now. I think as a climber, is someone who puts up new routes. And I don't know, just I was trying to imagine the experience of climbing on that by myself, and to me, it's quite impressive what he's done in Majorca, and continues to do. I mean, he just put
Yeah.
up that Black Pearl thing, which I watched him try a few times, and it's that dude is motivated. It's pretty cool to hang out with him.
Yeah, I mean, I was already saying earlier how you were just living the dream by being in Mallorca, but adding your climbing partner being Chris Sharma definitely kicks it up a notch. So you guys were on the north side of the island, cruise around in a boat. How much is there? Just tons more. What's it like
Hmm.
up there? Because I've only been on the south side,
It's
which is
endless.
pretty established. It's endless.
Yeah,
That is
it's
a
endless.
beautiful word to hear.
No, there's so much to be done in Mallorca, and I think that's what really captured my attention on this most recent trip. Was just like, sure, there's these big fish lines, there's these 5-star like must do lines, but then Big Fish just to the right of Big Fish is an incredible feature that hasn't been touched, and then around the corner from Big Fish there's another cave, and like just like you could go for miles and miles down the coast and find these incredible lines. It really just it's gonna take more people to go there because there's too much to do. And you know another thing, I can share a little bit about one of the projects that I went to with Chris. So while we were shooting one day, Chris took us to kind of like a new area that he's recently been going to. He has got a project. It's like this big cove area. It's a bit more rugged. Like the access is a bit hard. You're like kind of just like running down this dirt hill, really steep, kind of like no trail or anything. But eventually you get to like this big cove. And the day we were climbing there, uh, the waves were super intense, like crashing on the wall. Like we almost weren't sure if it was going to be like safe enough for us to climb, but luckily with this cove there's like kind of a rock that sits out in the front of it and kind of like stops the the force of the ocean a bit, and kind of like changes the patterns of the waves and makes it kind of tolerable for climbing. But so Chris had tried this thing a little bit and wanted to show me it, and we went in. And what's unique about this is the climbing kind of starts right away. Most of the other deep water soloing cliffs around Majorca, they have like little ledges where you can store your stuff, or you can throw a towel or some liquid chalk. But this was really just like the cliff started, so you had to do this long traverse in probably like 10 minutes of like 512, kind of like Crosley traversing to get to the center of the cave where the project starts. um, so we ended up wrapping off the side of the cliff and kind of taking turns one by one trying. But like this cave was such a wild feeling, and like the swell of the ocean was going up and down. Like some days there, I don't know if you remember, but like the swell can change. Like it's not necessarily like waves crashing on the wall, but like the ocean's like breathing, and it can go up like 10 meters and then drop 10 meters and just like keep fluctuating like this constantly. So like that was like the energy of the water that day. um and I remember Chris and I both gave it a few tries, but like once you fall on this, you're like in the middle of this cove, and I just remember it being like dark blue water. You're in the middle of the cove, you got to swim all the way back out and then climb up this static rope that we hung down. But it was like terrifying. Like I had my shark fears were kicking in. quite drastically. And like that route is going to be quite hard. We didn't do all the moves, but I do remember like on the last try, I was like, Chris, I'm gonna throw a rope down and shoot some photos of you. Um, and he was like, nah, like I'd rather you like come down and just like hang out. Like he wasn't that psyched on being down there alone or anything like that. And it was kind of refreshing for me to see that he had a bit of fear in him still. But I mean, just for example, like that's one cave, and we were trying one line in that cave, and there's probably you know so many of those.
Man,
But yeah.
I just can imagine. Actually, first of all, it's good to hear that Chris is mortal, and he has fear, because something that those waves going up and down, yeah, it's this swell. It's like it's a wave, but it doesn't break exactly. It just goes up, but it's like a big, whoo, like it's loud in there. It's intense, and yeah, and that's terrifying. And I don't blame him for one. Yeah, you need to have someone down there because things do go wrong. I mean, I've seen some things. I was with Ethan Pringle, and we both broke something on this roof, and it was only probably only 30 feet up, but falling on your side, we both hit our ear. Like it just happened that I thought we were gonna. I thought I busted my eardrum, and you're like,
Yeah,
oh, okay.
happens.
But yeah, I'm just there picturing that, man, and it's wild. And then the other thing that is different about being out there and doing that stuff is when you start climbing at your limit, there's this balance of, to do a move that's hard, you have to really give it your all. But there's certain types of moves that you don't want to put a really solid heel hook in, because you'd want to land on your feet. And it's funny how you have to kind of switch back and forth. You go like, is this the try? Like, am I really doing it right now? And so, hearing that, and the waves are crashing. Oh, damn, man, you are living the dream. That's awesome, man. Thanks for taking us there. Yeah, is there anything more you can say about the filming
Yeah.
you did? Yeah, because
Well,
that's
I mean, I could say
oh
some more about Big Fish, and just like one of the main challenges I think for me in that climb, and also Yerne, who is my main partner for attempting that thing. Like we really had a hard time with getting conditions, and I think that that's something that is, you gotta kind of like go into Majorca expecting to run into that issue. um and Big Fish, like we're constantly watching the direction of the wind, because that we kind of learned was the main player in how the day would end up. If the wind was blowing onto the cliff, it's just misting the wall all day, and the whole thing would be soaked. So I was there for 2 weeks trying Big Fish, and I think I didn't try it more than 10 times. I think there were probably like 3 or 4 days where we walked into the cliff. It's probably like a 30-minute walk, and then you sit on top of the cliff, and then you kind of like down climb to the side of it, and you can see the whole route. But there were probably like 3 or 4 days where we went to the cliff and sat there, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., hoping that it would dry, and then it never dries, and then we go home, and then we go back the next day, and maybe it's wet, but it's climbable, So we climb through the whole bottom half of the route with wet hands. We get to the no hands rest, and then we hope that we can like you know climb the crux. But oftentimes, like we really did run into this issue of the route being wet a lot. And that to me was like it became really frustrating, and also just really a more of a mental battle, because you had to be really patient with the conditions, more so than I have on sport climbing trips or bouldering trips. I think it's really challenging when you just can't climb at all, and you're just waiting for a day, and maybe you had a high point, 5 days ago, and you finally get another day and you can't get back up, and you don't know when the next time is that you're going to get back to that point. So there was just like tons of challenges with conditions. And yeah, I mean, I think the day I sent it was the last good condition day for like the next week or so after that. And maybe I wouldn't have had another window in the trip to actually give it a good attempt. um, but that was definitely something that became a new challenge to face.
It must
And
have been a
yeah,
special moment then when you did it because you had just taken that big fall. You know, conditions are, I assume conditions were good enough at that day, and having that all come together is special. I remember conditions being weird there because sometimes random holds would be soaking wet,
yeah,
and
it's so
you just be like,
bizarre.
wow, yeah.
It's
Uh,
honestly really hard to even know what makes a good day there. Like that was what we kind of like ended up doing. It was just like we just got to show up. So every day we would just hike in, down, climb into the cave, like look at it. You know, we had certain like markers, like okay, if we can see chalk on that hold, it's a good day, you know, or if there's no sign of any chalk on that hold, like it's soaking wet, you know. So like we had these certain like markers to kind of get an idea. We would also like have to throw the static line down and make sure that the crux was dry enough to do.
Yeah,
um
so you said that the route just by itself, even if it wasn't a deep water solo and didn't have all these interesting things, adding to the both the complexity but also kind of the meaning and the fun. You said that the crux was an 8-move V12, and that right there, culminating in a big lunge, shows you how quality it is because an 8-move V12 is really cool. Like that's cool to
yeah,
describe it like that versus a 1-move like thrutchy thing.
yeah,
Can you break it down a little more from that no hands rest and what it's like entering that crux up high
definitely.
and how tired you are?
Yeah. So, I mean, you would get to the no hands rest typically like with a light pump or something like that. One thing that was challenging was like on the wet days, we would get there a bit more tired. You know, your feet are cutting a little more, you're over gripping a bit more. So, like, that was another kind of thing that added was like if it was a bit wet, you felt a bit more tired getting up to the boulder prom. Like, you had to put more energy uh, down. But the boulder prom itself is so cool. It's really like when the cave kicks back at its steepest point. You start climbing up this arete. You do a few intro moves with like toe hooks and these like heel hooks. Doing these amazing compression moves. You get to like one final little shaking spot before the boulder prom really starts, and you're kind of like in this slopey dish, and you reach up and left to a little pocket, and you get a heel toe cam next to your hand.
Scary.
And yeah, it is kind of scary, because you really got to like commit to the heel, and you're like matching hands basically. And then at that point, the hard climbing really starts, and you reach up and left to like these. There's all these pockets like have like these finger locks. The rock is really smooth there, so there's not a ton of texture. So you end up kind of like jamming into like side pulls and whatever holds you ends up kind of like getting these weird little finger jams. But the main crux of the route revolves around like a bad left hand finger lock, and you get a really small pinch intermediate, and you have to get your feet really high, and you throw for a 2 finger pocket. And at this point you're quite extended with your arms. And for me, the hardest move was this next move where you fall into like this mailbox slot right next to your right hand. And this was just, it was, you had to be so precise. It was like literally perfect size for your fingertips. But one of the challenges with that was it was quite scary because you're so extended at your arms. As soon as you let go with your left hand to fall into this slot, you're kind of like falling already. And you, if you don't catch it, which I fell there a handful of times, you start spinning as you're falling because you're like barn dooring as you do this move. So you kind of like are falling out of control. And there was a couple times where I like slapped my arms on the water when I entered the water, and like had, you know, purple arms, like bruises along my arms and stuff like that. So for me, that was one of the more intimidating moves. And then if you stick that move, you do 2 moves after that that aren't too hard, but they're kind of tiring. And then those 2 moves set you up on 2 side pulls, which is the last hard move, which is like a big lunge. Chris's feet came off as a dyno, but I ended up being able to keep my right foot on. Um, and that move is really what it comes down to, because you need to have enough energy to like really like your feet are by your waist, by like your chest, and you're just like you really just got to throw. And if you don't fully commit to that move, you will not catch it. That's one of the things that I like really realized. I was like, no matter what, like if I get here and I'm gonna go for that move, like I need to go 100%. And if I went 80%, I'll come up short. It was like at that limit for me. doing that move. And yeah, I guess like after I had fallen there and taken that kind of bad fall, I was a bit shook up. But as soon as I got there later that day, I felt better. I felt like the holds had dried up a tiny bit. I felt a little stickier on my left hand, which is what you're throwing off of. And I remember just like got set up, and I was honestly, I had like a moment of fear in my head because I was thinking about falling again, and I was like, I told myself if I get up there again and I didn't feel good, I would just let go and I wouldn't go for it. But I guess I felt a little sticky in my left hand. There was a boat of people below me, and I really just like tried not to hesitate at all, and I got my feet up and I just like went full power, and stuck the hold. And at that point, you get a flat ledge where you can match your hands. It's not like a big rest, but you can definitely like get your heart rate down. And at this point, I had actually never done the next few moves on a rope or anything. I didn't really think about it, and um, I kind of was expecting them to be a bit easier than they were. But you end up like having to surf up and left to the arete, and it's like this quite bad sloper, and you have to put a heel hook by your hand. And at this point, you're 65 feet up or so, and you're putting a heel hook like at your face, grabbing onto a sloper. And like I remember just like levering up as slowly and as carefully as possible. You hit like a little sloper intermediate, and then you like go one more time with your right hand to a jug. And at that point, I knew I had done it safely. And I gotta say, like, I don't think I've had these moments topping out climbs that I've worked hard on, or like I've had these moments of like holy shit, I just did that. But for me, like I had this moment of like holy shit, I'm like still alive kind of thing. Like I felt crazy because I had never actually been that high up without a rope before. And I think like as soon as I was like on the more casual part of the climbing, I was just like kind of surprised, and like I was still like having this like adrenaline rush of fear. And it was unlike the feelings I've had in other disciplines of accomplishing a goal that I worked on. It was more of like a relief, more than, I was more just like, oh, like thank God that's over and I don't have to try that move again. I was also obviously very satisfied, but I was just like, I felt like I could breathe, and just like I was almost like laughing. I was just like, that was like kind of a wild experience. you know
Fuck yeah, Matty. That is sports action right there. This is this is what makes certain kinds of climbing super special. I did this whole podcast talking about star quality and what makes something good, and the ineffable part of it is these moments where a route or problem or whatever is requires you to do something that's special, like that commitment at the top. Like it's like,
hmm
okay, I'm tired for the crux, and then what you said, you have to commit 100% for that last big dyno, like that. How did this perfect climb get shaped so that like right at
yeah.
the limit you have to put your all out? And I just, that's so special to I mean, it's so, congrats, man. That's a beautiful moment, and just
Yeah,
great
thank
job, man.
you.
That's really
Yeah,
cool.
it was really special for me in my climbing, honestly. Like it felt like I was experiencing something new in the sport, and it really felt like I had new feelings. I had just like new process completely. And to me, it's almost like trying something for the first time, and like having this totally unique experience that you felt like you've had, but it was so different. And like and I was preparing for it on all these other climbs, but I don't think I really was prepared for like the moment of like topping out that route. um and yeah, it was special. It was cool for me.
Well, I just want to share some other routes in Mallorca for mere mortals, because one of
Sure.
the things that
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like
let's get
about
some
that,
wrecks.
well, just like I'm not, something that I like about climbing, especially like this place in Mallorca, is again, it can, there can be these things that get created by the route that are these special moments, or I shouldn't say they're created. They push you towards that experience because maybe someone could come along and for them that was just easy, and so it's different. But I think that something like Afro Man, I've argued that Afro Man, this 12A or B, and Mallorca's got to be one of the best climbs of that grade in the world. And ejector seat is this 7C, 12 plus, and you have to do this move where you kind of go for an undercling and get your feet way up and do a big move. It's called ejector seat because it spits people way out. But then actually, even once you stick that, you kind of have a little bit of a tricky exit. And the reason why I bring them up is because to me, they're safer, they're easier, but for maybe people like me, you can still get that a hint of that
Yeah,
experience. It's just
totally.
it is cool here that just keeps going up and up. So, is there any other climbs that really stick out in your experience in Mallorca that you had wonderful experiences on as well?
I mean, I think like what you said, Calavarcas and the Diablo Wall are must sees. You know, there's so many great lines. Ejector seat, all cats are black in the night, I think is another really
Something like
amazing
that.
route on
Yeah,
Diablo Wall. You know, there's so much. I think it's really, you should go there just expecting to like get scared and lower your level a bit, you know, at the beginning. But I think like one thing that I realized while deep water soloing, and I think like throughout my years climbing, is like as an athlete, and also just like for people who aren't professional athletes or people who are just like in their own life, like you never really realize, or you're not like fully aware of how far or you can push yourself. And I don't think like even as a professional athlete who's been climbing for 20 years, like I still don't feel like I am aware of what I'm capable of yet, you know. And I feel like you don't actually fully understand that, or you never actually like get there unless you put yourself in certain positions where you're actually like really having to push yourself, or get out of your comfort zone. And I think like as soon as you're willing to like step out of that box a little bit and maybe get a little scared, maybe go one move further than you thought you were capable of, like that's when you start to like realize like how much potential you have, and how much actually like how much potential that you have inside of you that you maybe haven't accessed yet. And I think like one of my biggest things that I advocate for climbers is like trying multiple disciplines, is like getting out there and doing something that you think you're going to be bad at, or you know, trying a style of climbing that you think you're going to fail at, or it's not your forte or whatever. And actually like realizing that you're more capable than you thought you were. And I think that that's something that I actually kind of like came to a realization a bit with deep water sailing, was like um, just like the mental part of the fear aspect of it, and then also you know, like what I was willing to do to like try to do big fish. I just feel like I, you know, kind of like had to access certain different things that I hadn't before in climbing. And yeah, that was cool for me.
I love that. Yeah, times a or plus 1,000. I think you're onto something there about putting yourself into situations and finding out that you have more than you did before. And I do think that Mallorca, it pushes you in these areas. And something that I thought was interesting is I know you struggled with conditions, and for me, I actually really didn't struggle with conditions, not because they weren't bad, but because it almost just wasn't part of the experience. I was still so wrapped up in the fear and the
Hmm.
whole experience that I don't know the how hard I could climb. I definitely never reached my physical potential deep bar soloing,
Hmm.
but it did take it all out of me just in a total way. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, sorry to continue on that path,
no,
but
I love it, dude.
I
Freaking
I
love it.
feel like
Please.
there's so much in our sport in the last decade or so that has progressed in terms of training. And obviously like you see people now that are so strong, you know, and like it's almost crazy today how many good climbers there are. You know, it's like a notable ascent happens almost every other day, it seems. And like the way that people train has progressed so much. Kids have gotten stronger, but I think like one thing that's really kind of like stayed the same throughout all the years is like how the mind works. Or like we haven't, I feel like we, like we get stronger, but our mind has been constant, right? And like it's always been the biggest thing that holds you back, I think. Or it's always like I think like having certain belief in yourself is more of the battle than being prepared for the climb that you're about to try. I think, just preparing yourself mentally for certain things, and also like not even like having a strong head or learning how to deal with fear. I'm not talking about that necessarily, but also just like knowing how to accept a failure, knowing how to accept a setback in the sport, or maybe you have a low point on your project, or just like the whole process of climbing is 80% mental in my opinion. And I think that attention has gone so far towards training that it's almost like it's probably, would be more beneficial for people to focus on like how is your mental state when you're going to your project, or when you're going to the gym to train. Like what are you thinking about? How are you like, are you comparing yourself to other people? Are you like down on yourself? Are you staying positive? Like all these different aspects that actually have like a major effect on your climbing. I don't know, I feel like that's something that's always going to be constant in our sports. Like it's how you handle things mentally yourself. And I think getting out of your comfort zone, for instance me trying big fish or something like that, like has really enabled me to grow mentally as a climber, or has helped a lot with my mental strength. And I think a lot of people should put more focus into those types of training than just like hangboarding or something like that. But
Well said, man. I think that this is why when we really talk about the greats, there's a reason why we talk about Chris. And I mean, I will never take anything away from Chris's physical ability, which he has quite a bit, but there's something that we all see in Chris, and this pushing, that that willingness to push into the unknown, I think is what makes him someone special. And I know now his route realization is now biography, but I think that it's important, this name realization, just watching Chris. I got to watch from afar Chris be the man when he was coming up and just repeat everything like it was a joke, even though he wasn't even the man yet. He was like 15, but then watching him go into that next level and push the sport and then continue to push the sport, and then hearing from you and the awe you have of what he's doing out there in Mallorca by himself, that just really shows something different that clearly we all love and tap into, that maybe doesn't get talked about as much, and kind of
hmm
what one of the things that makes him
yeah,
special.
yeah, definitely.
Damn, man. I well, you just made me want to go click purchase on the ticket for September. I
Yeah.
think Mallorca is special, and I'm glad that, I guess I always think it's awesome, but I am not getting to see this tier that you're at, and there's just something that is cool to hear from someone like you who's been there, done that, and is like, no, you guys, like this is fucking cool. Like, this is great. I mean, I'm down to stay there, but I also, just because we were just talking about Chris, and I also want to talk about how you spend a lot of time behind the camera, and I mean, dude, you've been part of some of the most iconic pictures and films in climbing. And yeah, so you were there to film. Like, I mean, if we can, whatever you can share about Real Rock, that's cool, but
Yeah, totally.
also let's just hear more about what it's like, being the man behind the camera.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, yeah, I mean, that's definitely like my second passion for sure is photography and film work. And I've kind of learned that it pairs quite nicely with climbing. I don't think I would have gotten this far into photography or film if it weren't for climbing. I really picked up a camera because first and foremost, I was going to cool places, and I wanted to just kind of like take photos and have these memories. But then it turned into more of like sharing notable ascents of my fellow climbers and my friends, and that's where the film part kind of came into play. But yeah, I mean, with the Majorca thing, I got hired to be a cameraman on the Real Rock shoot, and that film will be quite cool. It's of Angie Scarth Johnson, who's a climber born in Australia, living in Spain, and kind of had her first experience deepwater soloing. And I think the film will kind of go through her lens and what her experience was climbing over the water. And she met up with Hazel Finley, who's also like a key role in that film, and they kind of just go on a little tear around Majorca and climb different things. But I guess like for me, one thing like that is is challenging, and specifically in relation to that, is my 2 month trip in Europe started with about 2.5 weeks of no climbing. Like I went to Europe, and I was working for the first part of the trip, and your level drops when you're not climbing, and it's hard to kind of like maintain fitness for whatever goals you might have sometimes. And I think one of the lessons, or one of like the main things that I've learned in my career as like a photographer, is that you have to be willing to make sacrifices, and you have to be willing to put your climbing shoes down, and pick up the camera for the better sake of what might be happening. Like, do I need to have another attempt on my project right now, or should I actually document something that could be quite extraordinary, or could be lead to a big film, or lead to some other kind of like production. And throughout the years, I've really definitely like kind of struggled to find that balance. I've gone on a lot of trips where I wish I could have put on my shoes more than I did, and I've been on trips where I wish I could have taken my camera out more than I did. And just kind of like finding the right balance between those two has definitely been like the biggest thing that I've struggled with, as a pro climber. But for me, like, I'm not trying to complain. I'm not trying to make it. I think it's just something that I've had to learn, how to deal with mostly. But I guess one thing for me that I've really realized, and what's been like the main like payout for me, is just like how it does feel for me when I take a photo that I'm really proud of, or when I get a clip, or I make a film that is actually like a moment. Like, a lot of these things have stuck with me as much as other climbing achievements in my life. And one thing that I've learned throughout my years as a professional climber is like balance in this sport is crucial. And that's not just balance between um, you know like my climbing and my photography, but it's just balance. And like, I've found like if I put too much pressure on my climbing, or if I put too much energy just into climbing, I do see negative things come out of that. I feel like maybe you get in your head a bit more, or um, you just have certain expectations for yourself, and sometimes it's nice to have other things happening in your life to keep you distracted, to keep you kind of like on an even keel, for everything that you're doing. And yeah, I've really found that the pairing between the two has benefited me. It's maybe hurt me in some areas of my 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 professional climbing side. It could have hurt me, and maybe I would have been going on more climbing trips in the last few years instead of work trips. But I also find that these days there's a lot of benefit into someone that can do a bit of both. And I think it's also kind of helped me a lot as a professional athlete, and in this world, this climbing world, as someone who can shoot and film.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't sound too bad, man. You have one passion that you're world class at, and another passion that you're world class at, and they both take you all over the world. I'm just giving you crap, but I actually think it's interesting that you have that tension. But what makes me think is that your deep understanding. I mean, you described what was really like on Big Fish, and I just gotta imagine that when you're behind the lens and capturing these moments, because you've been in these moments, you really know what to capture. And I'm sure that the athletes that you're around, like Chris, you know, it must mean something to him to know that you've been in similar situations, and that you know, I just know that he must appreciate that the person taking the shot of him is not, I don't know, is not, you know, just a random
Yeah.
exec or something.
No,
But yeah.
it's true. It's true. A lot of I mean, I think a lot of my success has come through my relationships with other climbers, and obviously the brands that I've worked with. But like one thing that I've noticed that for me as a climber is also super important, and what I've noticed as a photographer is like you really do want someone that you can trust. And like if you're, let's say, three-quarters of the way up your project, about to enter the crux, and you have a cameraman 5 feet away from you, you don't really want the vibe to be off. You know, you want them to be ready, you want them to be understanding of what you're kind of going through. And you also just kind of like it really does help if they're your friend. It's really true because as an athlete you're kind of putting yourself in a vulnerable place by putting yourself out there, and by maybe showing your failures or showing, you know, your down moments before you send or whatever, you know, and having someone that you can communicate with appropriately through those kind of like dips in the process can be really beneficial.
Yeah, can you tell us more about? I'm kind of curious about some of the logistics of just making sure you're in the right place at the right time, like even just like the rigging. But yeah, how does that, like what happens when your, well, it's a good thing it's your buddy, like is, you know, falls on that crux move. You think it's maybe the last try, and then I've been around some pros where that pressure, you know, I've been around that camera crew. And it's not quite as romantic as those wonderful pictures make it look, where there's
Yeah.
that pressure there that your ticket is for tomorrow. And yeah, what's it look like just logistically and emotionally?
Yeah, definitely. I think like, I mean, the biggest thing is understanding what is happening that day. You know, it's understanding what their goals are and what, you know, what your goals are and what their goals are, and how to basically just merge the two seamlessly. But oftentimes it really does come down to understanding the climb that they're on. You know, I think probably the first few times I go up, I'm shooting photos and I'm kind of like picking my angle. You know, I'm thinking about the different positions to be in. I'm thinking about where the crux is, where they might be after the crux, and how I could set up for maybe the anchor clipping moment or something like that. But it's really like keeping communication open with your athlete. You know, telling them, hey, are you okay if I'm in this position for the crux? And then once you get through the crux, you're going to have a bit of a shake there. And then I'm going to be jugging up 5 bolts and setting up for the anchor or something like that. So like I have it pretty much staged how I'm going to be shooting each section of the climb, you know, and typically you set up for the crux, you know, because that's the try hard moment, that's the breakthrough, that's the big shot that you want. And if you can get that shot, or you get the anchor clipping shot, you can always build around that. You know, you can get the close ups later. You can get like the easier climbing. You can shoot it from multiple angles later if you need. You know, it's always better when you can shoot those angles when they're working the route and then everything is authentic, right? But sometimes you got to go in for close ups, or you got to go in for, you know, certain hero shots or whatever. But oftentimes, you know, it's, I think one thing that's benefited me is being a climber, and it's being able to get on the wall on a rope, feel comfortable swinging around on a static rope. Oftentimes I got like hooks or cams on my harness, and you know, I'm like swinging over, grabbing bolts on other routes, hooking into pockets to get into like the perfect, or what I would call the perfect angle for the shot or whatever. Um, so it you know, I think what's benefited me again is also the fact that I am a climber and I am willing to go on these trips for a month or 2 months. You know, it's hard to find filmmakers or photographers that are willing to stick it out for that length of time. And I do think that ends up hurting the type of content they're releasing because they rush whatever they were shooting, and maybe they didn't actually get the send right. But if you are willing to stick it out and make a few sacrifices to be there for every try, you'll definitely get like the real raw moments, the important stuff in my eyes. And then also understanding climbing, like for me, the biggest moments, like I always tell people that are helping me, like put the camera in their face before they're about to climb and right after they're climbing. Like those to me are like some of the most like human moments that you'll get out of the athlete, is like their preparation and like right after. Like if you see them coming down off the rope and they're about to like touch down, if they sent or didn't sent, like go get some initial reactions. If you want to do some pickup interviews, like do them at the cliff, do them in these moments that feel authentic, and feel true, to what their process was. So definitely like understanding the process and understanding climbing, but it's also knowing a bit of when to not put the camera in their face, or when to, kind of be more discreet about it, or to take one photo instead of 50 photos, and give them space in moments when they do need space.
I'm sure each athlete is different. Some people maybe really struggle having someone right there at the crux. And
Yeah, well, that's
uh,
another big thing, is everyone is different, and you kind of like
yeah,
you got to know what works and what doesn't work.
you gave some super good tips there about the timing of taking pictures. Is there any other like kind of filming or pictures 101 where
Yeah,
sometimes these shots like like when the leg is really straight versus bright colored shirts, like is there
sure,
any
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, some major points that I look for in photos are, I like to see their face. I mean, this obviously doesn't apply to every photo. Like, be artistic however you'd like, but certain things that I really try to capture is facial expressions. I like to see what they're holding on to. I don't really like when you can't see a hand is hidden behind a body or something like that. Like I don't like when you can't see all 4 points. Feet aren't to me as important as hands, but I do like to see like their whole body. I want to see them stretched out. I want to see them in these unique positions. I don't really want to see them clipping or chalking up like let's see the action. I like to shoot the line. Like oftentimes before I photograph a route or a boulder problem, I look at the climb itself without the athlete in it, and I say, okay, how could I shoot this boulder and make it look good without a climber on it? And then once you add the climber, you just add another layer, another like dimension to the photograph. But really, like the frame is the boulder, or the frame is like this crimp, or maybe it's like a high foot move or something. So you frame it for that, and then you add the climber in. And typically, this works really well for sport climbing because you can see a big line, or maybe there's like a color change in a certain section of the rock, and then that's something that you can focus on. It's something unique, or or more eye catching. And I personally like to see a couple moves ahead. I like to see, okay, they're not about to grab a jug, or they're about to enter a few more hard moves. Like I like to think of these images from a climber perspective and say like, okay, can you get information about the climb from this photograph, and can you see the belayer, can you see where they came from and where they're going? And obviously this all changes for every climb and every athlete, but I do take those into account at the beginning. And then like once I feel like I got like the main hero shot where you see the line, you see the athlete, you know where you're going, all that kind of stuff, then that's when I start to move around, swing around on ropes, focus on more details, focus on other artistic things that might be catching your eye. But yeah, I think those are some of the main things that stand out for me.
That was awesome, man. That was really, really good. Yeah, I don't think we mentioned that you went to school for this as well as having decades of experience doing it. I just, that was, wow, that's really cool, man.
Yeah.
I got to ask if there was any pictures or films when you were younger that really inspired you, that stood on your head, that maybe, I mean, I'm sure it steered some of your climbing career, but also potentially your filmmaking career?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely. I think like having certain role models and certain people you look up to, for me as an athlete and also as like a photographer or filmmaker, has been super important. Like, I think it's there's nothing wrong with trying to copy or trying to just replicate what you see. You know, I think you should try to draw inspiration from everything, and even if you're trying to directly copy someone's image, you know, typically that's quite hard to do in climbing. But like if you see a photo and something about that photo you would like to try to replicate, like you should try to do that. You should try to experiment, see how that person got an image that looks that way. And I think, I mean, there's so many, but I think like someone like Jim Thornburg is a great example of his catalog of images. To me, is just incredible. He's really just, it seems like he has an endless amount of photos from all over the world, but just like his eye, to me, he really captures the essence of climbing. And rather than, you know all of his photos to me have a unique look. They feel, very singular and just very much their own, which to me is really cool. Like if a photo can sit alone, without a series next to it, I think that speaks quite a lot for that photograph. And when it comes to films, I think King Lions to me was like the first film that I saw where I was just like, this thing is an iconic film. It was perfectly made. It was has these legendary climbs. It's Chris Sharma, but it just like really captures climbing in a great light, I think. And I think that film will always definitely stand out to me. There's tons of stuff that's getting made these days that's great, and it's cool to see how creative people have gotten with edits and just like where the direction is going with climbing media. I think is quite cool. But I guess like coming from a film background and coming from a university where I studied it, like I very much like narrative film. I like, like art films. I like indie films, and I would say the majority of my time is spent watching non-climbing films. It's like watching narrative work and just being amazed by the type of things that people are making.
Wait,
And
there's films that don't have climbing
yeah,
in them?
yeah, it's true.
Huh,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, I just want you to know that anytime you have that struggle between being a climber at that moment, or being the guy behind the camera, you know that stuff that you all capture out there and give back to us really is important and life changing. Like,
Cool.
I've said it before, I've traveled the world because of certain pictures. I think I told you that the picture Boone Speed took of Ethan Pringle
Mm,
on La Ostia.
mm.
I mean, that basically drove me to go back to Mallorca 3 times, and that was it for me. I wanted that climb.
Yeah,
Like, it's yeah.
I mean, I love that. I love that, and I think like for me, hearing that from people, hearing that maybe they were inspired by a photograph or a certain film, like to me, that's massive, and I do wish to be giving back to this community because it's done quite so much for me over the years. And if it's not in putting up a new route or something like that, like I would love to just inspire people to get out and go climbing through the content that I produce. And to me, that's huge for me, honestly, because like sometimes going to Majorca, getting the second ascent of Big Fish, it's like, who cares? It's like it's rad, but there's so much rad stuff in climbing happening. It's sometimes hard to feel like going and spending a month or two on a climb is benefiting the climbing community, in any
I mean,
sense,
Maddie,
like
I would say that the way that you described what it was like doing Big Fish, that there's a chance that someone listening now or soon will go to, because of what you made that crux sound like in that moment. That, I mean, you clearly, it
cool.
shook you in a beautiful way, that it changed you. And so someone's going to be like, oh, I want to go have that experience too. And King Lions, watching Chris on Los Humildes Pacasa, like I was like, I need to go
Yeah,
to
yeah, we're
Oliana
just
and
doing
get on
those
that thing.
tufas.
And I gotta tell you, that climb freaking lives up to what it looks like too, because sometimes you see these beautiful lines and they look cool, and then you get on them and like they don't quite feel like they look. They're kind of
Yeah.
not so cool feeling, but that is a king line. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
you mentioned that you've been in this community for a while, and you've grown up doing it, and it cracked me up when I chatted with you because I it took me a while to realize that Matty Hong, your dad is Steve Hong, who was also a famous climber, and I got to watch him, I think, get second in nationals in Mission Cliffs back in like
Nice.
the mid '90s. And yeah, so you've grown up in climbing, and we've even before we clicked record, you were dropping some of the biggest names in climbing, and you've been there. I mean, you are a big name in climbing, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you've kind of seen as a consistent thread in all these greats. Like, is there anything that just, I mean, they all are so unique, but what is consistent among these amazing names that you've gotten to spend your life climbing with?
That's a really good question. I think one thing that and this just kind of came to me, but I think one thing that I do find that is a common thread between all of these incredible climbers is like they all have their own unique approach, and they all kind of like they haven't tried to to do anything that someone else is doing necessarily. Like they all have very much come to an understanding about how they climb and about what works for them, and how they themselves can approach a project and get it done. And I think that they've all become so accustomed to this process that they've really like got it down to a science now on what works for them, and they don't necessarily like deter from these things. Like they're they're very much like willing to just I don't know necessarily where I'm going with that, but I think just like they all have something unique that that doesn't go across the board with all the strong climbers, but they all have something that kind of makes them their own climber, like Daniel is very much different than Jimmy Webb, but they're both amazing boulderers. And Dave and Chris Sharma grew up climbing together. They're both incredible climbers, but had completely different approaches to it. And they all kind of like fell into their own way of doing things. And I think that they have not necessarily like succumbed to the masses on how or what they should be doing, and they've prioritized their climbing, and they've really like shown their commitment and their work ethic. And one thing that I've really that probably should be said is like the amount of work that I see go into certain projects is not shown. It is not necessarily talked about, maybe more so these days, but like I know Daniel Woods trains crazy hard, and he'll go to a boulder prom and he'll try one move, for 3 days, and he'll just have the belief that he can do that, and he'll have like this certain like commitment to his craft that is just like it's really impressive, and I see that across the board with all these climbers. It's like they're so dedicated, they're so committed, they have, you know it's not like a singular focus necessarily. Like they do have this like teamwork mindset in a way of like, especially I've noticed that in the boulderers, is that they're really like working on these goals together, even though they're very like personal. But it's very much like they've found what works for them. They found the people that they like climbing with, and they've just really taken that off. And yeah, I think I guess the main point there is like they're all unique, they're all different, but they all have the same dedication and passion and commitment, and this attitude that allows them to prepare for these projects and get them done. um, yeah.
Interesting that the boulders are there's no red tagging in bouldering, so maybe that's how they are more friendly. It's yeah, it's really interesting thinking about like a young Chris Sharma, a young Dave Graham, and how different they are. I went to school in Santa Cruz, and there was always this sign that was broken, and the lore, and I think it was true, was Chris broke it off doing one arm pull ups on there. And I know Dave Graham was not doing one arm pull ups when he was 12 or 13 like Chris was. And it's something that I think is a really good message to put out there, is that whatever your body type is, whatever your strength or lack thereof, like there's a path for you. That there, everyone makes it work in their own unique way. And so if you don't look like Chris, you might look like Sean Bailey, you might look different. And I love that our sport kind of seems to not have it figured out where it's like, oh, are you not 7 feet tall? Well, the NBA is not for you. Sorry. It's just, I mean,
Yeah,
that's just
yeah.
how it is.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's so different in this sport, and I think it's really one of the coolest things. Is just like how everyone can excel if if there's room for everyone to excel in this sport. Um, and I think like yeah, it's pretty cool how much variety there is in the talent here.
Well, we started out by you getting on the plane and going to Mallorca, filming some of the coolest stuff, and then climbing the coolest stuff as well. Uh, yeah, I mean, if you have the time, we can talk a little bit about where you went next, or we can even jump to your send of biography. Is there anything that we should cover before we sign off?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. I think one thing that I think is unique about, I just want to share about the biography send, because I've told this to a few of like my close climbing friends, because to me it's kind of wild. Is like um, when I did that route, I think it took me like 22 minutes or 23 minutes to climb from top to bottom. And this is me resting 5, 7 minutes on rest. This is being cautious on every move, climbing, very controlled, and I sent the route, right? And then a few days later, we went back to get like an uncut drone shot of the climb, and I was like, okay, I'll try to redo the climb to get like as big of a drone shot as we can. And I started the route just after the boulder problem at the bottom. There's like a one boulder problem, so I'm starting there, and in my head, in my eyes as a filmmaker, I'm thinking like, okay, drone shots, uncut drone shots, you want to climb fast, right? Like you want to, like, it's an uncut, let's keep the action moving. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just try to climb this like quickly and like see how far I can take it. And I ended up like resending the entire route, and the drone clip that came out of that is like 6.5 minutes long. And to me, that was just like such an interesting aspect of my process or my approach to the climb, because something obviously changed in my head that said like why am I taking 22 minutes to climb this route, and then all of a sudden a few days later I can do it in 6 minutes, and it felt incredible, like something obviously shifted, and it really made me realize that maybe how I climb is not how I should be climbing, like something needs to change in my head that allows me to climb how freely and how comfortably I did after I had sent the route. And I think, anyone who's done a climb and gets back on it again, you like are shocked about how some move that took you weeks to do, now you do it every time. And to me, just with the time difference in those two clips, it's interesting to think about, and definitely like something that I'll take to my next projects is maybe, stop thinking about like how pumped you are going to this next section and just go, or stop hesitating about, did I place that foot the perfect way, and just place it and push, and I think like when you watch films of some of the best climbers, like if you watch Adam Ondra climb, he to me, his style of climbing is quite impressive, but he's fast and he's very efficient, and I think like taking those things into account is something that probably all of us could do a bit, is just like getting rid of that stress and trying to climb more freely.
Dude, that's really interesting. Like
Yeah.
that's a big difference. And I'm sure we've all had that experience of repeating something and you almost like don't care and you're almost not even trying that hard and somehow you
It's
just
like weirdly
cruise
easy.
it. Yeah. Yeah. You know what's hilarious, man, is so there's a film out there of you doing biography, previously known as Realization,
Mm.
world's first 515A. You know that climb, and first of all, I gotta say the drone shot at the beginning of Ceuse is just
Nice,
stunning.
yeah,
I mean, I just think it's a gorgeous place. But what's hilarious, man, is two of my notes on here is I was like, oh man, that thing looks. So I've never been to Ceuse. I've never seen biography, but it looked really hard right off the deck. Like you were pulling
yeah,
right away. And so you already addressed that. You said there's a little ball wrong with the first. And then my my writing is it looks like you're climbing really fast. Is this just editing or were you do you actually climb it super fast? And it's hilarious that I guess I kind of
yeah.
picked up on that. But
The
yeah,
uncut, if you want to watch the uncut, is on. I do have a TikTok account actually, and I did. You are allowed to put like longer form content on there. So the uncut of the drone is on there, and I think it's fun to like. I watched it a couple times afterwards because I was like, it's John Glassberg did the drone flying, and he did a great job, I think. And I don't know, it's cool to watch because you can really see every move in the route. You can see like every hold, and that route to me is probably the best route in the world that I've been on.
why is that?
I think everything about it makes it so great. I think the rock is some of the best. I think the movement on the climbing is incredible. I think the history behind it, with it being the first, adds to its greatness. I think the fact that the crux is at the top is also like, I love that. I think that like having all this climbing building up to the climax of the route is makes it even better. And then the fact that it's in Ceuse, it sits on like that crown of granite up on that hill is just, the landscape's kind of unmatched.
The crux at the end thing is you love it once you've sent, you hate it
Yeah.
before you send.
So one thing, I'll just add this because why not? One thing that I took as my approach to climbing that route was, I knew going into that however many climbers have gotten close and fallen on the top of that route. So I knew like it would come down to that last boulder problem. I ended up finding kind of new beta that worked for me. Skipping like a hold and doing like a little jump move. But my process for working that route, knowing that the hard part was the finish, was okay, I'm going to do the boulder prom at the top, and then I'm going to start now. There's like another rest and then a few moves leading into that boulder prom. So I kind of worked myself top down, and eventually I sent the route, I think, from like the fifth bolt, and then from a rest at the fifth bolt you start in or you get to a rest, and then like you really start climbing. And I did it from there, and then at that point I had this confidence in me, like all I need to do is add in the 7C plus v10 boulder prom at the beginning, and connect what I've already done. And just working that top down made it feel like when I got up to that crux point pumped, I had been like, okay, well, I've been pumped here before on these links that I've been working on. And I think and I was telling myself like, I've been more pumped than this and done it, or like, you have like these things to kind of compare yourself to while you're climbing. And I think I didn't even try the first boulder problem for the first 2 weeks, because I was just trying to make sure I was prepared for, as soon as I climbed that, as soon as I was ready, like I'm gonna start trying from the bottom.
Oh, dude, that's a really
Yeah.
interesting. That it almost seems obvious when you say it, but that is not obvious, and it makes me think of almost that stuff we were talking about earlier, where if you can almost just make it like a repeat, then it's
Mm.
easy. You're like, oh, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
pumped
I
all the
mean, it's
time. I
kind
keep
of that.
doing
It's
this.
it's kind of that mindset a bit. Yeah.
I got some probably dumb Gumby questions on this. So again, I've never been to Ceuse, but I'm watching this film, and I'll link it in the show notes. And you put like a little reserve like plaque or stone or something. Like I've never seen that. Like,
That
is
was
that
a
like a
joke.
thing? Okay.
Yeah, no, we actually, I forget where we got that. We may have yoinked it from a restaurant, but I thought it was kind of funny because like that route is so popular, and every day there's really not a big window in the day to try. Um, you know, and as soon as one person gets on it, they're spending 30-40 minutes working the route. Especially if you've never been on it before, it takes a lot longer. So sometimes you get up there and you're like fourth in line to try biography. So I don't know. I kind of thought it was funny to bring a reserve tag and and just throw it down, see how people reacted.
Yeah. Well, hey, dude, maybe it's like, hey, that's my freaking tag.
Yeah.
This blew my mind when I went to Spain. I don't remember when this is, maybe like 2015, and I was a definitely a boulder, and I was used to, if I were to walk up to a harder boulder wherever, I would probably know the people that, if there was anyone there, which rarely happened, I would probably know them. And then
Hmm.
I'm in Spain, I'm in Margalef, and there's like a giant line for Arabea, which is, 9A or whatever the grade, like it's hard. Like
Yeah.
it is hard. And there's just all these random people just trying unbelievably hard. I didn't realize how high the level of sport climbing was, especially in Europe, until that visit.
Yeah, and honestly, like it became more apparent to me on this most recent trip. Like, there's so many young kids trying biography, trying like these hard routes in Ceuse. It's definitely harder and harder to get on some of these lines, and I think like a route like biography that does see so much traffic, like it certainly is more polished now. Like I definitely think like it's slightly harder. I'm not trying to give it an upgrade or anything, but I do think like there's an added challenge because of how many people try that route, and like the crimps are polished, the footholds are slippery. um,
Yep.
but that's the state of our
Yet
sport now.
Yet you go deep water soloing and there's not a soul
Yeah.
out there. You go to those climbs I talked about, like the most famous climbs in deep water soloing around like Ejector Seat or Lasca. There is no one out there,
Yeah.
man. Or maybe
Yeah.
now, it's been a few years, but just so everyone listening, if you want to go have that adventure experience,
Don't go. No, just kidding.
no, dude, you put out these,
Yeah, no,
you
I'm
put
just
out these
kidding.
films. But I always think, I mean, honestly, like if you're listening and you're the kind of person who hears this and then goes and buys a plane ticket, and I'm sitting next to you in the little cave on Cova del Diablo, you're my people anyways. So,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
most
it's all
people hear that
good.
stuff and they don't actually want to do it. So, oh, good stuff, man. I, I just got to hand it to you. Just, you are living the dream, and thank you for taking us to Mallorca and giving us a slice of what it's like. People should be drinking wine and looking at the ocean while they're listening to this, because that's what Mallorca's really like. We would always pick up a €3 bottle of wine and then drink it at sunset, and we're like, why is this so good? And why is
It's
it
pretty
cheaper than water?
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
Damn.
Definitely take the opportunity, if you don't pass it up if you have it, to go to Mallorca.
Yeah. Oh, I got one more Gumby question for you
Yeah.
from that Ceuse video. What are all those little rock stacks around the base of the cliff? Like they're
Yeah.
like cairns, but they're
Yeah,
like
yeah,
complex and beautiful.
those are actually kind of like iconic for that position. There used to be one, like I think when Chris did it, there was one, and now there's like two or three. Um, yeah, they're just kind of like there. I don't know necessarily the history behind them or anything. I think someone just made a rock stack, and it's kind of like the iconic biography rock stack now.
Like if you
Um,
send, you get to add one stone to the thing.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Sure,
Or if you
go
don't,
for it. Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I thanks for sharing all that with us. Before I let you go, do you have a pro tip you can share with us after all the other amazing tips that you did? You not prepare one, Maddie? Did you?
No, I got you. I got you. I think like for me, one of the biggest things that's like helped me in my climbing is really trying climbs that are slightly above my level. It's really like pushing yourself in areas that you're not comfortable with. For instance, like if you hate sport climbing, you should really try to go sport climbing. If you hate bouldering, which is something that I didn't really like growing up, I was only a sport climber, but as soon as I started bouldering, my sport climbing progressed rapidly. And I think climbing, you can learn so much from it, and from all the different disciplines. You have different things that you can learn from each one, and the more climbing you do, um, the better you will be at it. And it's really just about like practice and getting out there and pushing yourself. And I think you're not going to get a better climber. You're not going to become a better climber if you say take. You're going to be a better climber when you take those big falls and when you're like climbing to your limit and taking falls. So yeah.
Ooh, you're not going to be a better climber if you say take.
Yeah, there.
Damn,
Let's just sum
dude,
it up
let's
to
just.
that sentence.
That was beautiful. Okay,
Yeah.
I feel seen and I don't like it. Well, good stuff, man. We talked a little bit about some of the filming you did. I will plug that video that you were in
Cool.
of you doing biography. I think it's on Mellow. Was it on Mellow?
Yeah, it's
Is
a
that where it
mellow
ended up?
piece. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Not a crazy long film, but just exactly what I like to see, and it will make you punch a ticket to, or it will make you buy a ticket to Ceuse, like even
Yeah.
after 5 seconds when you see that drone shot.
Yes.
And then I know that you mentioned you were filming for Real Rock on the upcoming one. I don't know when that's going to drop, but any other things that you want to point people towards your work, maybe your website or your, of course, your Instagram. Of
Yeah,
course,
yeah. Drop me
always
a
an
like and a
Instagram.
follow. No, I
No,
guess
please do.
yeah,
Please do.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I think the Real Rock will come out. I think the premieres in the middle of February. Uh, those are always fun to watch. But just follow along. We got a lot of exciting trips planned for this year, and I'm gonna be heading, I think, to Guatemala here next month, and after that Argentina. So I think I'm gonna be in South America quite a lot this year, developing new routes, and definitely keep a lookout for content and photos, and stay tuned, and appreciate everyone.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing, the journeys you went on and that experience. And I just want to tell you that I think you should move to Mallorca, and I think you should put out consistent content for Mallorca, and I think you should do a ton of first ascents there. And I
Yeah.
think you should let me go on the boat one time. That's my
Hey,
vote. That's
sounds good to me. Sounds good to me. I got no complaints with that.
uh, all right, man. Well, I'll try to pin you down in the next year again after you've had another peak experience. But thanks for sharing that last one with Big Fish. That was awesome, dude.
Yeah, definitely. We should do this again. And nice talking to you.
All
Keep
right.
up the good work on the podcast, huh? It's fun to
I'm
listen.
trying. Yeah, getting one more each week. It starts adding up.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks
Yeah.
for being part of it.
Yeah, good on you.
All right, take care, Matty.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.